Story 1. This happened to me about 6 years ago when I was living in a small town in northern Pennsylvania. My parents owned a pretty large property. Our house sat at the end of a quiet road, and behind it was a big backyard that stretched into a patch of woods. The yard itself was open grass, but after about 50 yards, it turned into thick trees and brush. When I was younger, I loved that backyard. I'd play there, build little forts, and sometimes camp with friends. But when I turned 17, something about it started to feel different. It began one summer night. My parents had gone to bed early, and I was up late playing video games in the basement. Around midnight, I went upstairs to get something to drink. As I walked through the kitchen, I looked out the sliding glass door that led to the backyard. At first, I didn't notice anything strange, but when my eyes adjusted to the darkness outside, I realized something was moving. Near the edge of the yard, right where the woods started, it looked like someone standing there. I froze. The backyard light wasn't on, so all I could see was a silhouette. It looked like a tall person just standing completely still. I remember thinking maybe it was my dad checking something outside, but then I remembered my dad was asleep. I stared at the figure for maybe 10 seconds. Then it slowly stepped backward into the woods and disappeared. That instantly made my stomach drop. I locked the sliding door and went to wake my dad up. He grabbed a flashlight and went outside to check, but there was nothing there. No person, no sound. He figured it was probably a neighbor cutting through the woods, but something about it didn't sit right with me. The woods behind our house weren't a shortcut to anywhere. You'd have to walk through miles of forest to reach another road. After that night, I started paying more attention to the backyard. A few days later, something else happened. It was around 10 p.m. and I was taking the trash outside. Our trash bins were near the back fence, pretty close to the tree line. As I walked across the yard, I had that weird feeling like someone was watching me. You know that instinct you get sometimes. When I reached the trash bins, I heard a small sound coming from the woods, like a branch snapping. I turned toward the trees and just stood there listening. Then I heard it again, a slow step. Someone was definitely in there. I backed away slowly, trying not to make noise. My heart was pounding in my chest. Then I heard breathing. It was faint, but I swear I heard someone breathing from inside the woods. I didn't wait to see anything else. I ran straight back into the house and locked the door. When my parents told me, they thought maybe it was a deer or some animal, but I knew what I heard. Animals don't breathe like that. About a week later, the scariest part happened. It was around 1 a.m. I was lying in bed watching videos on my phone when I heard a strange metallic noise, like something hitting metal. At first, I ignored it, but then it happened again. Clang. I sat up in bed. The sound was coming from outside, specifically the backyard. My room faced the back of the house, and I had a window overlooking the yard. I slowly walked over and peeked through the blinds, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Someone was in our backyard, a man. He was standing near our shed. The shed had a small metal door, which explained the sound. The man was trying to open it. He looked skinny, wearing dark clothes and a hood. But the weirdest thing was the way he moved. He kept stopping and turning his head toward the house, like he was checking if anyone was watching. I stayed completely still. I didn't want him to know I could see him. After about a minute, he finally managed to open the shed door. He stepped inside. That's when I ran to wake my parents up. My dad grabbed his phone and called the police while we all stayed upstairs watching the yard from the window. About 30 seconds later, the man came out of the shed, but this time he wasn't alone. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but then we all saw it clearly. Another person stepped behind him. Someone had been hiding in our shed. The two of them walked toward the tree line, but before entering the woods, the second guy turned and looked directly at the house. Even from far away, I could tell he was staring right at our windows. It felt like he knew we were watching him. Then they both disappeared into the trees. The police arrived about 15 minutes later. They searched the woods for almost an hour, but didn't find anyone. However, when they checked our shed, they found something disturbing. Inside were a bunch of empty food wrappers, a blanket, and a backpack. Someone had clearly been living in there, probably for days, maybe longer. That realization freaked us out, because that meant whoever those guys were, they had been in our backyard for a while, watching the house, watching us. After that night, my dad installed motion lights and security cameras around the yard. A few days later, one of the cameras caught something at around 3 a.m., a man standing at the edge of the woods, just staring at the house. He stayed there for almost 2 minutes before slowly walking away. We never saw him after that. But even now, whenever I think about that summer, one question still bothers me. If we hadn't woken up that night, and if those 2 men had stayed in our shed longer, what exactly were they planning to do? Story 2. This happened when I was 19 years old, during my first year of community college. At the time, I still lived with my parents in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Ohio. Our house wasn't anything special, just a normal 2-story home with a medium-sized backyard. The yard had a wooden fence around most of it, except for the far end where it opened up to a small patch of woods that belonged to the neighborhood. Behind those woods was an old drainage path that ran along several properties. During the day, the backyard felt normal, but at night it got incredibly dark back there. No street lights, no houses facing it, just trees. The first strange thing happened in late October. It was a cold Friday night, around 11 p.m. My parents had gone to visit relatives for the weekend, and I had the house to myself. I remember I was watching a movie in the living room when my dog, Rusty, suddenly started growling. Rusty was a golden retriever, and he almost never growled at anything. I muted the TV and looked at him. He was standing near the sliding glass door that led to the backyard. His fur was raised, and he was staring into the darkness outside. At first, I figured maybe a raccoon or deer had wandered into the yard, but Rusty didn't just bark. He kept growling low in his throat, like he was scared. I walked over to the door and turned on the backyard light. The yard lit up instantly. Nothing was there, just the empty grass, the fence, and the tree line in the distance. Rusty kept staring at the woods, though. After a few seconds, he slowly backed away from the door. That alone made me uncomfortable. Dogs usually run towards something interesting, but Rusty looked like he wanted to get away from whatever was out there. Eventually, he calmed down, and I brushed it off, until the next night. It was around 1 a.m., and I was upstairs in my room playing games online with some friends. Then I heard a noise outside. At first, it sounded like something dragging across the grass, slow, heavy, like someone pulling something. I muted my headset and listened. The sound continued for about 10 seconds, then stopped. My room window faced the backyard, so I carefully got up and looked outside. The yard was dark. The motion light hadn't turned on, but I could see something near the fence. At first, I thought it was a trash bag or something. Then it moved. It looked like someone crouching down. My stomach dropped. The figure slowly stood up, and that's when I realized something terrifying. They were inside my backyard, inside the fence. I immediately ducked down below the window. My heart was racing so hard I could feel it in my throat. I grabbed my phone and quietly called my dad. He told me to lock my bedroom door and call the police, so that's exactly what I did. While I was on the phone with the dispatcher, I heard something else. Footsteps outside, in the backyard, crunching slowly across the grass. Then, the sound of the wooden fence creaking, like someone leaning on it. I stayed completely silent. Then came the worst sound. 3 slow knocks on the glass door downstairs. My entire body went cold. The dispatcher asked if the person was trying to get inside. I whispered that I didn't know. Another knock, then another.
Not loud, just slow, deliberate taps, like whoever it was knew someone was home. I sat there frozen for what felt like forever. Then the knocking stopped, but the footsteps started again, moving along the back of the house, toward the side yard, toward the front. Eventually, the police arrived about 8 minutes later. They searched the property but didn't find anyone. However, they did find something disturbing. Near the back fence, there was a long rope lying in the grass. Attached to the rope was a metal hook. The officer asked if it belonged to us. It didn't. They believed someone had used it to climb over the fence. But that wasn't the creepiest part. The next morning, I checked the backyard in daylight. That's when I noticed something near the woods. There was a small clearing behind the fence that I had never really paid attention to before. And inside that clearing, there was a chair. Just a single old folding chair facing directly toward our house. It looked like someone had been sitting there, watching the backyard, watching the house, watching me. The police came back and checked the area more carefully. They ended up finding footprints all over the dirt behind the fence. Whoever it was had been there multiple times, possibly for days, maybe longer. But the story didn't end there. About a week later, something even worse happened. My parents were finally back home, and it was around midnight. I was in the kitchen grabbing water when I looked out the sliding door, and I saw it again. The chair. Except this time, someone was sitting in it. At first, I thought my brain was playing tricks on me, but then the person slowly stood up. Even from that distance, I could tell they were looking straight at the house. I yelled for my dad. By the time he came downstairs and turned on the backyard light, the chair was empty. The police were called again. They searched the woods with flashlights for nearly an hour. Nothing. No person, no sound, just the empty chair sitting in the clearing. After that night, my dad tore down part of the fence and installed bright floodlights around the entire yard. We also put cameras up. For a while, nothing happened. Then, one night, about a month later, one of the cameras caught something at 2:17 a.m. The footage showed a man walking along the tree line. He stopped near the clearing, stared at the house for a moment, then slowly walked away into the woods. But here's the part that still terrifies me. The camera zoomed slightly when it detected motion, and for just a few seconds, you could see the man's face clearly. My dad showed the footage to the police, and a few days later, they told us something that still gives me chills. The man in the video had been arrested before, multiple times, for stalking and breaking into homes at night. The officer told us something else too, something they found out during their investigation. Apparently, another house 2 streets away had reported someone watching their backyard late at night, from the woods, sitting in a chair, facing the house, and waiting. To this day, I still sometimes wonder how long that man had been watching our house before we noticed him, and what might have happened if he ever decided to stop watching and start coming closer.
Story 3. This story happened to me when I was 22 years old. At the time, I had just moved into a small rental house outside a town in rural Colorado. It wasn't a big place, just a single-story house with 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, and a backyard that stretched farther than most houses in the neighborhood. The backyard itself was mostly open dirt and patchy grass, but the far end of the property bordered a large field that eventually turned into dense trees. The landlord had mentioned that the house used to belong to an older man who passed away a few years earlier. Apparently, the place had been empty for a long time before I moved in. I didn't think much about that at the time. The first few weeks living there were completely normal. But one night, something happened that made me start feeling uncomfortable about the backyard. It was a Tuesday night around 11:30 p.m. I had just finished playing some games on my computer and decided to take the trash outside before going to bed. The trash bins were located in the backyard near a small wooden shed. When I stepped outside, the air was cold and quiet, almost too quiet. No cars passing, no wind, just silence. I walked across the yard toward the bins when I suddenly heard something behind me. Footsteps. Very faint, like someone stepping slowly on dirt. I immediately turned around. Nothing was there, just the empty yard and darkness stretching toward the field. I stood there for a second, listening carefully. The silence returned. Eventually, I shrugged it off and tossed the trash in the bin. But as I turned to walk back toward the house, I noticed something strange near the far end of the yard, at the edge where the field started. There was a shape standing there. A person. At first, I thought maybe it was a neighbor who had wandered onto the property, but the longer I looked, the more unsettling it became. The figure wasn't moving, not even slightly, just standing there in complete darkness, watching. I couldn't see their face, only a silhouette. I felt a cold wave of fear hit my stomach. "Hello?" I called out. No response. The figure didn't move. That's when I decided to quickly head back inside. I walked fast toward the house without taking my eyes off the person, but right before I reached the back door, the figure stepped backward into the darkness and disappeared. That moment gave me chills. I locked the door and checked the backyard through the window. Nothing was there anymore. I told myself it was probably someone walking through the field, but deep down, something felt wrong. The next night, I started noticing strange noises. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a faint sound coming from outside, like something scraping against wood. At first, I thought it might be an animal, but the sound continued, slow, deliberate scraping. I got up and walked to the window that faced the backyard. The motion light suddenly turned on, and that's when I saw something that made my entire body freeze. The shed door was open. I knew for a fact that I had closed it earlier that day. I stared at it for several seconds. Then something moved inside the shed. A shadow. Someone was inside. My heart started pounding. I immediately grabbed my phone and considered calling the police, but before I could dial, something else happened. A man stepped out of the shed. He was tall and thin, wearing dark clothes. He slowly looked around the yard, then he turned his head toward the house, toward my window. I dropped down below the window instantly. My breathing was out of control. I didn't know if he had seen me or not. After about 10 seconds, I slowly peeked back up. The yard was empty. The man was gone. The shed door was swinging slightly in the wind. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I checked the shed. At first glance, everything looked normal, but when I stepped inside, I noticed something disturbing. There was a sleeping bag on the floor, along with empty food wrappers and a plastic water bottle. Someone had been staying in there, inside my backyard, possibly for days, maybe longer. I called the landlord and told him everything. He said he'd come check the property later that week, but he didn't seem very concerned. That night, I made sure every door and window was locked. Around midnight, I turned off the lights and went to bed. At some point during the night, I woke up to a strange feeling, the kind of feeling you get when you sense someone nearby. I looked at the clock, 3:14 p.m. Then I heard it, a slow tapping sound. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the backyard window. My heart immediately started racing. I stayed completely still in bed, listening. Tap, tap, tap. 3 more knocks, slow, controlled, like someone lightly tapping the glass with their finger. I immediately turned around, and what I saw nearly stopped my heart. There was a face pressed against the glass, a man staring directly into my room.
his eyes wide, unblinking. His face looked pale in faint moonlight, and the worst part was, he was smiling. Not a normal smile, a wide, disturbing grin. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The man slowly lifted his hand and tapped the glass again. Tap, tap, tap. That's when I finally snapped out of it. I grabbed my phone and called the police while backing away from the window. By the time officers arrived about 10 minutes later, the man was gone. They searched the entire backyard and surrounding field, but didn't find anyone. However, they did discover something terrifying. Behind the shed, partially buried in the dirt, they found a small backpack. Inside the backpack were several items: a flashlight, some food, and a notebook. The police opened the notebook. What they saw inside made my stomach drop. The pages were filled with drawings of my house, my backyard, my shed, and even my bedroom window. But the most disturbing page was the last one. It was a drawing of someone standing inside my bedroom, next to my bed, watching me sleep. The police believed the man had been living somewhere in the nearby field or woods, possibly watching the house for weeks, maybe even longer. After that night, I moved out of the house within 3 days. I never went back. But about 2 months later, I got a phone call from the landlord. He sounded shaken. He told me that police had finally caught the man. Apparently, he had broken into another house in the area late at night. The homeowner woke up and called the police immediately. When they searched his belongings, they found something chilling. Another notebook, filled with drawings, dozens of houses, dozens of bedrooms, dozens of people sleeping. And according to the police, my house wasn't the first one he had been watching, not even close. To this day, I still sometimes wake up in the middle of the night and check my windows, because every time I think about that man's face pressed against the glass, I remember the one thing that terrified me the most. He wasn't trying to break in. Not yet. It almost felt like he was just checking to see if I was awake, or waiting for the perfect night when I wouldn't be.